Our goal today is to demystify some of the most common communication challenges when working with an outsourced team so that you can maximize the value and return of your outsourcing engagements. Today, we are excited to have Dave Peace with us to share from his wealth of experience working in Asia and consulting for top multinational companies such as IBM, HCL, Samsung, L'Oreal, Pfizer, and the World Health Organization. So without further ado, Dave, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. It's a delight to be with you. I moved with my family to India 20 years ago, a month from now on July 17th. And we find our journey to be a journey of continuing to learn and grow. And I just have enjoyed that process of getting to know different cultures and walking with people. There are cross-cultural differences. And as we begin to bridge those differences, we long to see people coming together across cultures. And so my work has been in the areas of leadership coaching, helping cross-cultural virtual teams build trust, and working with expatriates who have come to India. As we look at cross-cultural differences, we're going to use India as our primary case study in most of these. But we also find that this reality is true no matter what culture we come from. A large Japanese company in Delhi, if you go into their lobby, you'll find their rooms, their meeting rooms, with titles such as harmony, consensus, synergy. These are their cross-cultural values. In working with French companies, they generally like to ask hard questions so that they can find the best solution possible. And so there are keys to each culture that we work with. And as we find out what their values are, then we begin to understand how to bring people together, especially in a virtual atmosphere in which we've learned a lot more about since COVID hit us. But even before COVID, there is virtual distance. And the more we can understand about the culture of a specific company and a specific country, we learn the keys that will unlock synergy within virtual teams. So what are some of those differences? Again, using India as an example, if you look to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you will see some scales. And these particular scales are from Erin Meyer, who has written a book called The Culture Map. You can go onto our website and actually you can find out where you line up in some of these cross-cultural value differences. So we're using that, and you'll see on each of our slides, you'll see those diagrams which will indicate cultural value differences. Indians value preserving harmony. So often they'll tone down difficult messages. You might hear something like, I may not be able to join the meeting, which interpreted often means I have another meeting at that point and I have to be at that other meeting. So toning down things, there's the implied no. And so if someone would say, I'm planning on being at that party, but my wife is sick or my kids have an exam, again, with indirect communication, you begin to pick up the fact that that will be very difficult. And it is hard sometimes to say no. I've heard senior leaders tell me, it's hard for us to say a direct no. Why? Because it's often seen as being rude. Americans, on the other hand, like being direct and unambiguous. We focus on clear understanding. We want to make everything as clear as possible. Sometimes indirect communication causes us frustration. And because we're saying, why are they beating around the bush? Just tell me what's happening. And we need to be careful that we are not unaware being offensive, that we not realizing that we actually are, by direct communication, being more offensive to our colleagues. Craig Storty, in a book called Speaking of India, talks about often when people from the West, Northern Europeans, speak to Asians. It comes across as very direct. One note here, and there are a variety of outliers as we look at these various cultural dimensions. One is that sometimes American niceness, our tactfulness, is seen as niceness, and we are not actually communicating as clear as we think we are. Americans like to sandwich our criticism with, well, you're doing very well. There's this one challenge we're looking at. And sometimes for our Asian colleagues, we sometimes are actually also confusing because of our tactfulness. So that's one place in which we become actually a bit ambiguous. So how do we overcome this? Ask open-ended questions. Ask clarifying questions. Avoid leading or judgmental questions. And I remember instances, at one point I had a team that was training in Chennai, and my colleagues were coming that night, and it turned out that the hotel said, we don't have a room for them. And I asked them to be sure to find that room. Essentially, I told them what I wanted them. I asked a question, they knew what I wanted them to answer, and they told me that answer, but there was no room that night. A cultural incident might look something like this. Sandeep has just joined the Bangalore office of an American multinational company with a head office in New York. He was going to New York for 3 months of training and had already been assigned to a team with members in New York, Tokyo, and Bangalore. Sarah, the New York-based project manager, has scheduled a teleconference meeting on Tuesday. Sandeep needs to go to Chennai for a visa interview, and on Monday informed Sarah that he'll be going to Chennai that evening. Sarah, can we have the teleconference tomorrow, 7 p.m. for you, or should we wait until you get back? Sandeep, better if we can wait, but if you can do it, if you like, if it's necessary, I can do it. Sarah, do you want to postpone it or not? I did use this incident in a group that I was training with the World Health Organization. There was one from Japan in that group, and she thought Sarah was extremely rude. Why? Because it was crystal clear to her that Sandeep wanted to postpone. Cultural values do play a big part in how we understand communication. Another aspect of which is closely related to this is high context communication versus low context communication. High context cultures are more concerned about how information is impacting the person receiving it so that harmony in the relationship is preserved. High context communicators are very conscious that their communication projects a desire for harmony and respect. Low context cultures are more concerned with the factual exchange of information so that transactions may be completed without formality or protocol. Low context cultures are very tuned in to hear the words spoken and less aware of the subtleties in communication. So you'll see some words in the right there that describe the values of both high context and low context communicators. So keep that in mind as you're communicating with low context communicators, whether they be in India or Japan or whatever part of the world. This is a significant value difference. And then there's the idea of saving face. Indians avoid putting others in bad light. What does that mean practically? It may be that if they're asked for a date, they may overcommit a bit, saying, well, we will work hard, we will get that done because it's been asked of us. And we don't want to put our team in a bad light for not being able to do it. Sometimes a fear of being seen as lacking skills. And I find that Indian teams do have great skills. And some of the frustration is more along the lines of communication rather than skills. Silence is preferred to disagreement. If I asked a group of Indians that I'm training, what will you do if there's tension with your colleague? Will you become more assertive to try to explain it yourself, or will you become quieter? I would say about 90% of the time I hear them say, we get quieter. And so Americans, sometimes just the opposite. We want to clear the air by openly discussing work problems. Quality or timeline problems must be discussed. Sometimes we see a perception of dishonesty because people aren't as clear or open as we want them to be. Conflict avoidance is viewed as unhealthy. Now, again, a caveat here, we have personalities as well. And Americans, we sometimes do avoid conflict. But pretty much our culture tells us, let's lay everything out. Let's put all of our cards on the table. And so openly discussing work issues is more important for Americans. So how can we overcome this? Use less you statements and more we statements. Anticipate problems and build processes to help deal with uneasy topics. And so have retrospects, have guideposts along the way that you routinely communicate back and forth, and asking again questions like it's us that infer it's us as a team, it's our project. And how can we work together to get the best result that we can get? And so suppose team A, from more of a direct conflict culture, have a criticism of the project. Those in Asia may feel a sense of they are being criticized, not that we're trying to solve the problem. So we need to change our communications in such a way that the team feels like we are focusing on the work problem, not on blame. It's almost like two people sitting on opposite sides of the desk looking at each other, and one comes around to the other side of the desk, and we sit on the same side of the desk looking at the problem. So we change our language. We change the way our code, as it were, so that we are communicating, let's focus on the problem, encouraging the team to accept and dialogue about it and to collaborate with it. And so for our Indian team members, it's important to understand Americans don't mean to be as critical as they might sound. And then there's a relationship versus task orientation. And as we look at this, taking time to engage in small talk can be very important. Taking their suggestions seriously, listening for our colleagues' suggestions. Strong relationships motivate them to go the extra mile, motivate our Indian colleagues, our Asian colleagues to go that extra mile. One of our friends, Kim, leads a team out of Pune, and one of her team members said, Kim will do anything for you. Why? They had relational capital. They had built relationships, and she had worked on that. And in part, she enjoyed it. Americans value trust built upon reliability or outcomes. And so whenever someone is predictable, when they are dependable, and they meet expectations, then I place trust in them. So we want clear communication, so there's no ambiguity. Sometimes our impatience negatively impacts efficiency. And so if we are impatient and don't take time to build relationships, In the long run, we may actually become less efficient rather than more efficient. So invest in learning about India and engage in relational conversations. And I can't stress this enough. I remember walking in the IT hub in Gurgaon, just outside Delhi, and overheard a conversation between a group of people walking along. And one of them said, "Now that I know you," such a vital part of working virtually and working across cultures. And so what we've seen is we need a relational presence. And this is true both ways. It's not just one way, but our Asian, our Indian colleagues tend to build the steps of the arch faster through non-work conversations, making sure that we show respect, that there is affirmation given. Then we open the relationship up to much more vulnerability and openness. Again, it's important as well that we do have alignment, that we have process clarity, that we're all working on problem solving. Dependability is important in building trust. But as we understand how the different cultures work, then we're able to do this in a much better way. And so we're looking at the importance of interpersonal communication. We're looking at instrumental communication, which essentially means we're clear in how we communicate. As those from the team of the country where the leadership of the company is, there has been a lot of tacit information which has been built over the years. And often that tacit information isn't something that we easily share, but we need to be careful that we do share that and that we share some background that is needed so that we can have more clarity as well that will lead to dependability. And ultimately, we want the kind of conversations where we can have dialogue. We can talk about what's happening underneath about our team, the culture of our team, how we can build our team together. And then, of course, one of the areas is that of hierarchy. Indians generally expect closer supervision by leaders. And if there is a very hierarchical company, and again, this is changing, this is all in flux. These are generalities, but waiting for approvals may delay communication. You don't disagree with the boss. There's a strong desire to please the boss. And so formal communication, there's more formal communication when addressing someone. A VP of one of the large Indian companies fined his new workers 100 rupees if they called him sir. Why? He wanted to give them comfort in moving across hierarchical lines so that they could relate with people that were older than them, even in other countries, and even their bosses more openly. Americans, it's okay to push back on your manager. I heard some CEO recently say, well, maybe it's better that they don't push back so much in a joking way. But we tend to delegate areas of responsibility with less oversight. And are we delegating responsibilities or are we delegating tasks? The boss is fallible. And so there's more of a sense of, let's talk about this. I'm not just going to do what you say. Again, we're moving towards dialogue. For those of us who are outsourcing, then it's important that we begin to work in more of a coaching style. Don't assume that your Indian team understands what decisions they can and they cannot make. And so again, asking questions that will empower them, drawing out of them what they know to be true, and then empowering them in areas of responsibility. There are, again, this is based upon Erin Meyer's book, but there are a number of studies done about cross-cultural values and how important these cross-cultural values are as we work across cultures and as we work virtually. And there are some that we haven't talked about in this session, but they are also pertinent. One of the most significant things I've seen as I've worked across these various business cultures, we need people that understand both cultures, that can be the cultural translators, that can see cultural differences and help bridge those gaps. And so when there are people, Americans living in India or Indians working for an American company here, we began to get some of this background and we began to build teams understanding through training and awareness that does move faster to that place of collaboration. But outsourcing works well when we take time to learn and grow together. Again, my name is David, or Dave, and Shanta Consulting. We're working in this area to bridge cultural differences that will bring people together across cultures.
Thank you so much, Dave. Yes, thank you. That was a very insightful presentation. You packed a lot in there in a short amount of time. So we appreciate that and we look forward to unpacking that more in the discussion. So before we start the panel discussion, we have a second poll that you should see on your screen. I believe it's already up now. We're going to take a 30-second pause to let you fill this out, and then we'll continue on with the discussion. So I'll go ahead and give you 30 seconds, and then we will come back. Okay, it looks like we are getting some responses in here. This looks great. So the purpose of this poll is for us to kind of know what cultural communication challenges to focus on for the discussion. So it looks like the number one was saving face and direct confrontation is kind of the most problematic that those of you who voted have experienced. So we'll make sure to discuss that when we do the discussion. So now I would like to invite our other two panelists, Greg Salzman and Kevin Sandall, to introduce themselves before we start the discussion. So Greg and Kevin, if you could turn on your videos, that would be great. Wonderful. And Greg, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and Brandwings?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Greg Salzman. I'm the founder and CEO of Brandwings. It's a marketing automation platform for companies that sell their products and services through channel partner networks. We just launched a couple months ago, and we're having a great time. Prior to this, I had started a company called Alliant, which sold automation software to the printing industry. At Alliant, we did have a team in India, and currently with Brandwings, I have a team in Brazil.
Great, thank you so much, Greg. And Kevin, would you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Tracy. My name's Kevin, and I am the CEO of Covalience. Covalience is a company we started about 13 years ago with the goal of really changing the way that outsourcing is done, trying to bring a more human approach to it, looking at the relational aspects and understanding the cross-cultural pieces to really drive a different outcome. I've spent more than half my life living and working outside of the US. I'm currently based in Southeast Asia and working with our team in Northern India on a regular basis, and really looking to continue to help our teams in Asia understand how to work better with teams in the West, and to help our clients in the West to really get the most value possible out of working with folks in Asia and across the globe.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate that. So before we dive into the discussion, I just wanted to quickly remind all of you that you can submit your questions at any time in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will answer this right after the panel discussion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the discussion. Dave, feel free to turn off the PowerPoint whenever you have a chance for that. And we'll go ahead and start with Kevin. So Dave kind of talked about these different cultural dimensions that can impact the way people communicate and the effectiveness of outsourced teams. So of the different dimensions that Dave has kind of just presented, which ones have you found most challenging when working with an outsourced team, and what have you done to overcome that challenge?
Sure. And I think each one of them presents its own unique challenges, but managing conflict has been, has definitely been one of the more difficult ones, and figuring out how to have a constructive conflict and not a negative and destructive one. And so there's a lot of different things that we do to try to work through that and to make sure that the conflict that's happening, whether it's a disagreement about how to do something or priorities or whatever, the project is facing. One of the things that I've done to try to work through that, and I think Dave mentioned it as well, is trying to really work towards understanding and asking good questions about what's going on, and to get outside of the problem. And so instead of working inside making it seem personal and directed at people, to step outside, to look at it from the outside looking in, and to ask to get feedback and to get the perspective of the team about what's going on, and then work at it from that angle instead of working at it from where I often come from, because I want to get stuff done, is here it is, let's get to it. And so stepping back, analyzing it together, asking questions, letting the team process it tends to help reduce that level of or lack of harmony as you work through that conflict, and gets everybody involved in trying to find a solution.
Excellent. That's very helpful to kind of hear your insight for that. So for Greg, from your perspective, if I were to ask you that same question, what cross-cultural communication challenges of the ones that Dave discussed have you experienced the most, and what did you do to overcome that?
I think it's very similar, and it kind of reflects the polls as well, is when you have some sort of miscommunication, when expectations are not met, in either direction. I think that is really the big challenge. I like what Dave said about relational capital. I think relationships are just foundational, for working through any problems you might have. I think as you get to know your team, and as they get to know you, you start to, I think consciously and subconsciously, it starts to shape some of the language or the ways that you communicate. And then, when there's a problem, not if there's a problem, but when there's a problem, just like you have problems, in your own internal organization, you're going to have problems with your outsourced team. If you can work through those problems in the context of a relationship, it just makes a huge difference. There's a greater degree of understanding, because I think you're working from a more, your communication is better because of that relationship. I think there's less fear, there's less concern, there's less worry on both sides. And I think that relationship just kind of helps you look to say, well, how can we just kind of dig into this issue that happened, and how can we better understand what happened? How can we take corrective action, and how can we work through it? So that relationship is really just foundational, to kind of helping us get through those hurdles, which we'll inevitably encounter.
Absolutely. I think relationship is definitely key to be able to build that trust and that communication that you need to succeed. So that's excellent. And Dave, for you as well, out of the cross-cultural dimensions that you discussed, based on your consulting experience, what have you seen be most problematic, and how did you kind of help companies to address that?
Yeah, I think another area is the area of, am I leading by assigning responsibility, or am I leading simply by getting tasked? And I've seen Kevin do this really well, where you begin to coach and mentor people and empower them to take on a task. I think about it, a month or so ago, I was working with a company out of Bangalore, and I sensed the excitement of some of the younger team workers when they were given a responsibility and they came through with it. It was a challenging thing, and they worked long hours, but it went a step further than simply just assigning, you do these tasks and report back to me. And I think we get just good sense of cohesion when you move in that direction.
That's great. No, that makes sense. So this next question is for Kevin, and it kind of goes back to the idea of relationship versus task orientation that Dave talked about in the presentation. I think even Greg started to touch on this, the importance of that relationship. So why is it important to build trust with an outsourced team, and what are some strategies to do that?
Sure, it's a great question. I think trust is foundational to any team, whether it's outsourced or it's local. It's all sitting in the same office somewhere or spread out across the globe. Trust is critical, and I think the reason it's so critical is because it is what drives those stronger outcomes. If the team trusts each other and knows that everybody on the team is working together, they've got each other's backs. When there's a problem, the focus is not going to be on the individuals. The focus is going to be on the problem. People are that trust then leads to stronger outcomes. It leads to a willingness to take chance, a little bit more of that, those chances that need to be taken to push something forward, as opposed to just holding back when there's an opportunity to really to really drive something. And then I think when there is a problem, if you've got trust in the team, the resiliency of that team to bounce back is much higher. I've seen over and over again working within Asia and other parts of the world that when the relationships are there and the trust is there, the team knows that, they're going to do everything they can to deliver really, really well for you, for the project, for the client, for the team that they're working with. But when there's a problem, they know that they're not going to lose their job. They're not going to get scolded, but rather you're going to come in and you're going to sit down and say, okay, what happened and how can we fix it? And I find that most of the time when that happens, they already feel bad that there was a problem because the trust was there and they feel like they've let you down. And so they were already started worrying about how they're going to fix it and how they're going to get it put together. So to come in and that resiliency then takes over and you get the problem fixed faster. You don't have people trying to hide things or point fingers at each other or shift the blame. And so I think that's a key. And for me, one of the best ways to build that trust, we've talked about relationship, but one of the things that I find is really helpful in building that trust is to give your teams the benefit of the doubt, the individuals on those teams the benefit of the doubt. When there's a problem and when you think they're communicating something or not communicating something that they should, instead of saying, okay, they're incompetent or they're not capable or they're not skilled enough or they're hiding something, instead, I try to put that aside and then look below that, look beyond that and say, what's driving this? What's the cultural value that they're holding on to that's leading them to respond or behave in a certain way? How can we get beyond the issue to what's underneath it and what's different about the way that we communicate, and then address that? Look to figure out how to talk through that. I value getting something done and having good quality in it. You value that we have a good relationship and we're talking about things beyond work and getting to know each other. How do we bring that together and find that middle ground where where we're having a healthy dose of building relationship, but we're also holding ourselves accountable to an outcome that is good quality and done on time and delivered the way it was expected. And how do we make that middle ground work? And so that's, I think once you understand what's driving, it's easier to find that middle place.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to describe that and explain that. So great. And Greg, this kind of goes based on what you had talked about, the importance of building the relationship with your team, of getting to know them even a little bit on a personal level. Could you share an example of how focusing on building relationships with your outsourced team positively impacted their effectiveness?
Sure. So I think that, especially, being a product-based software company, there's just a lot of, we're going to add this new feature. So we generate some, some specifications and we, hand them over to the team and, we'll have a meeting, and answer questions that come up. And, I think we had a situation where, for whatever reason, something was unclear in the specifications and the team didn't feel comfortable questioning that. And so instead of coming back and saying, oh, this doesn't really make sense, or I don't understand this, they just went ahead and wrote some code and delivered something. And of course, it wasn't necessarily what we wanted, right? So now what? What do we do? And I think this is where the relationship came in. We were able to, sit down. Fortunately, I happened to be making a site visit. We were able to sit down and just have a very open and honest discussion about it. And I think because there was a relationship, there was mutual confusion. But because of the relationship, there was a mutual trust as well. And this relationship said, hey, you know what? I don't understand this, but I trust you, and we're going to work through this. And you know what? We were able to work through it, and I think we each acknowledged, how we could have better, handled the situation, and as a result, I think moving forward, we did a better job of communicating requirements. I think if there weren't the relationship, I think we would have just kind of created this chasm of frustration between us. But because we had that, we were able to work through it, and really, it was something that paid dividends.
That's a great example. That's very insightful to hear, because I know sometimes we can just rush into what needs to get done, and then we wonder why it's not getting done because that relationship piece is missing. So that's excellent. So now, Dave, kind of going to you, what kind of came up in the poll is how do we manage conflict? And especially when the teammates that we're working with may come from a culture where it's very important to save face. What is the best approach for handling conflict in that kind of situation? And can you share an example of how that kind of worked out in real life?
Yeah, I think of a friend who she was in Cleveland, Ohio. The team was in Pune. She was just struggling a bit with something that had happened. And so she began the conversation with, I know that both of us want to find an answer to this. I know that both of our intent is for us to deliver this project well and on time. So she shifted the focus from your fault, my fault. And rarely is it one side's fault. But she began to bring them together as team and say, we share the same goal. We share the same direction. Your intent is good, and I want to acknowledge that. So let's come together, dig down, and let's work in finding an answer for this. I was working some time ago for a large American retail company, and there was something happened again in Pune, and the Pune team deleted a database, which is very rare and unusual. But the Americans in Chicago responded in a way that says, we'll work it out, we'll figure it out. Afterwards, that team was like this. And they worked together, and the team would stay up all night to achieve and arrive at what they wanted to arrive at. So basically, respect is such a key to solving conflict.
That's great. That's a really great example too, just even to see how, working through that conflict brought the team closer together and actually made them work together better as a result of that. So that's a really key insight that we can gain. So that's great. So Kevin, back to you. Dave kind of talked about this indirect, direct communication that can sometimes happen when maybe Americans or Europeans are working with people in Asia. What are some practical strategies to overcome differences in indirect, direct communication? For example, when some teammates might say no indirectly and US colleagues don't pick up on that, what would you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've got a number of different things that I have learned and used over the years that I find help with that. One of the things I do is I will ask questions in multiple times in different ways, and that helps on two things. It helps to make sure that everybody's clear about what I'm asking, because you have different ways of understanding English, different dialects, different accents. And so that helps to demystify the question a little bit or take some of that out. But it also gives people a chance to respond differently to the same question in a way that helps me to understand what was hiding behind, or between the lines, if you will. And so I will rephrase questions multiple ways to make sure that we're getting to clarity. So you responded this way. If I take that and I ask it a little bit differently now, is this still the case, or is it different now when we look at it from this angle? And so that helps to give people a way to respond that's maybe less confrontational for them, or less, that gives them a little bit more room to save face, or to respectfully answer you without feeling like they're being confrontational or challenging your viewpoint or whatever that might be holding them back. Another thing I will do, especially in this case of not getting a direct no, if I sense that there's something there, or I'm feeling like it's just we're not quite hitting it, or even when I don't, I just want to validate. Oftentimes, instead of asking the question again and trying to drive for that yes or no, what I'll do is I'll say, well, I think what I'm hearing is that you guys don't think we can make the deadline by Friday. I sense a lot of doubt that that's really going to happen. Is that what's going on here? So that gives them the chance to validate what you just said. Instead of having to tell you no, now they can say, yeah, that's it. Right. That's what we're trying to communicate to you. And then you can move beyond that and start to look at, okay, well, what are our options? What can we do, to move this thing forward, or to take care of this problem? Dave mentioned the idea of a cultural translator, and I think that's invaluable. Having someone on the team or in the team who understands both sides culturally and can spot those hidden nonverbal cues, things that are buried in the context of what's being said. And I find this works both directions. I've had project teams where we've gotten together. My offshore project team comes in and they said, hey, we got this email from Joe, and Joe said all of these things, and we think what he wants is this and that. And I look at that and I go, well, actually, I think Joe just wants this. And we are able to kind of work through that and help them understand, maybe they're reading too much into it or not enough into it, and vice versa. So having that translator, I think, can be very, very helpful. And having someone that can help to pick out the nuances from both sides and build that bridge in between. The last thing I like to do is I like to just ask people to paraphrase back what their understanding is. So we can have a long conversation. We go back and forth. And then I like to just say, okay, so what does everybody understand is what we're going to do now. And I think when you do that and you give people a chance to tell you back in their own words what they understand the action items are, what they understand the next steps are, what they understand the deliverables are, it helps to clarify, because now they're going to tell you in a little bit different way, we have to get this done, and we're going to get it done by next Friday. And then you can, and you had actually wanted it done by this Friday, and but now you're hearing exactly what they think they can do, as opposed to them saying, well, you know, we've got some conflicts, we're not sure. But now you've got a little bit more clarity because you asked them to paraphrase it back, and you had them actually, in their own words, tell you where they want to go or what they're trying to accomplish. And you get that a little bit more clarity into the communication that way.
That's great. Thank you so much for expanding on that, Kevin. Those are some really great insights into how people can manage or improve communication on their team. So, so for our panel discussion, I have one more question for each of you. And then if the audience has any questions, we can go ahead and do Q&A. So feel free to submit your questions now while we finish up the panel discussion. So let's go ahead and go to Greg for this one. If you could give someone one piece of advice about how to communicate more effectively with an outsourced team, what would you suggest?
Boy, there's a lot of things. If I were to boil it down to one, this may surprise you a little bit, but I would say, if possible, make a site visit. Obviously, with COVID, that's probably not going to happen right now. But you know, just to put it on your radar. You know, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's all the headaches of international travel. But if you can go and actually meet with your outsourced team for a couple days, you know, spend time in the office, you know, working through your project, you know, go out to lunch, maybe have a fun event planned in the evening. But if you can get to know them, that is an investment that you'll just continue to reap rewards for. You will build that relationship in a really great way. And because of that relationship, you will just find that everything works better.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Greg. Appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and transition to our Q&A time now. So again, feel free to submit your questions. We will go ahead and start with this one. So I'm just going to put it out there, and then Dave, Greg, or Kevin, you can kind of decide who feels most comfortable to answer this one. So the question is, since communication is essential to a successful outsourcing partnership, what qualities should a technology leader look for when evaluating a potential outsourcing partner?
Well, I can answer that one maybe briefly, and hopefully Dave and Greg have some additional insights. But I would say that one of the key things is that cross-cultural understanding. We talked about the translator, the bridge. It's having a partner who understands how to bring your context. So if you're in the US or Canada or Germany, to bring your context to the team that's outsourced. At Covalience, we call this reverse offshoring, but it's being able to bring that local context to your global team so that they understand. I illustrate this sometimes for people we're talking to about how to get a team up and running. You know, if you wanted to write a software for a point of sale for an automated car wash in the US, where you drive your car up and it goes through and gets washed, you know, trying to explain that to someone in India would be very difficult because they've never seen one. They don't have one in their local context. And so to understand what that is and how that works and what's the business piece of that is difficult. So, but when we can bring someone who can help create that, understand that, help them understand. And the same thing works with culture. If we can bring that local context into the team, they start to understand, oh, that's why Greg said what he said, or that's why Kevin acted the way he did. And they can start to figure out how to communicate better. I'd also look for teams that have experience communicating directly with you, or with the local person that they're working with. Many outsourced teams funnel all the communication through one person. And so that everybody else on the team doesn't know how to communicate directly with you. And that can be very frustrating if you're a Western company or coming from a Western cultural context. So look for partners who have trained their team and taught them how to communicate directly with you.
I would just say agree totally with what Kevin is saying. And I would say a team where team members are empowered and where team members have the ability to speak up, even if the boss is in the room. And I remember recently I was involved in some interviews with a team like that. And we were asking questions and the team they were able to speak their own minds. And so again, it's developing that corporate culture where you are empowering your employees. And as Kevin said, then they're more likely going to be able to go directly and answer your questions.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Greg. Would you like to add on?
I think I was just going to reiterate, especially from the perspective of, you know, someone who's run software companies, and, you know, I've definitely had some bad outsourced team experiences. And, you know, when I look back, I don't think it was because of, you know, technical incompetence. I look back and every time I just see, wow, we just had major communication issues. So however the outsourced, you know, team wants to handle the challenge, you know, I think what's most important is that they're acknowledging that there is a communication challenge inherent, you know, in crossing cultures and time zones, and, you know, and that they have a plan around that, and that they have a demonstrated history of success in this area. I think that's really important.
Great, thank you so much. So we have another question from the audience here. So go ahead and share this. When you come from a culture of direct communication, do you have any additional strategies for getting to the real answer when interacting with a culture of indirect communication?
I would say, again, as we are often more direct, if we can just step back from time to time and begin to ask indirect questions, ask questions that are more open-ended and that are not going to put people on a spot. So using a much more of an inclusive we in our team, and then changing our communication style. If we can adjust that communication style a bit, that really embraces the person that we're talking to, it does two things. It begins to build respect and relationship, and then it gives the opportunity for the person that we're talking to be more open with you. But changing our code, the words we use, is probably the first thing that I would look at.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I would echo that and say that inclusiveness is really key to building the trust that allows your team members, your outsourced team members, to feel like they are free to give you the real answer. I think a lot of times it's not that they don't want to give you the real answer, it's that they feel like they would be dishonoring you, they would be embarrassing the team, they would be, you know, that there's not a freedom to share the real answer. And so they've got to come up with something else. And I think the more you can be inclusive, but then also just letting, you know, you got to create an environment in the team that says we are all in this together. And when one of us makes a mistake on either side of the equation, we all have to figure out how to fix that together. I found one of the most powerful things working with my teams is when I make a mistake, when I do something that causes the team to have to go back and fix it, I take ownership for it. And I say, hey guys, I'm really sorry. I made a mistake. I did something wrong. We've got to fix this now. And here's how I'm going to help do that. But by owning that, by showing that vulnerability and being willing to say, hey, I did something, I didn't communicate well with you guys, or didn't make it clear, that was on me. That opens up things, especially when you're the boss or the manager, because once the manager puts themselves in that position, everybody else on the team sees that it's okay to talk about things the way they really are. We don't have to hide and protect ourselves in that environment. So I think that's also important, is to be vulnerable enough with your outsourced team to say, hey, you know what? I missed the meeting. I screwed up. I miscommunicated that. And we need to figure out how to do this differently or better. And here's how where we can get started on that.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. So I think we have time for one more question that we have from the audience. So this one asks, from the perspective of an outsourced partner or vendor, what key investments in terms of time, effort, training, money can be done from a communication or cultural simulation point of view? And I think we could also ask this from the point of view of a technology leader who's outsourcing. What investments or trainings should they look at to improve communication from both sides?
I'm working with a company that just bought out an Indian company. And from the very beginning, they are saying, we need to understand the culture. And so I did a 2-hour workshop for the top leadership. So they were very proactive in saying, we need to understand the folks that we're working with. How do we proactively say culture matters, and we want to find the keys that will make it work? If we're not proactive, we will go down a route. Sometimes I'll get a call 6 months to a year afterwards, and then there's just so much to fix. But if we can understand these things from the beginning, we're so much better off. And if you're in a bad situation, you can turn the corner, but we need to create an awareness and a knowledge that culture does matter.
So when I was at my previous company, we did take the step of hiring this fantastic consultant to walk us through these culture differences. And I should say it's Dave Peace. He was absolutely fantastic, not to embarrass him. But he did some workshops for us, both in India and then for our Western team. And I think what it gave everyone was a framework to begin to understand the differences. So rather than just getting frustrated and saying, oh, they don't get it, I think it caused people to stop and just rethink their own reactions and to say, I remember Dave was talking about, these different paradigms, and then to kind of start to, understand this miscommunication or this difficulty through that paradigm. And I think, then it kind of helps. So, if you're doing a lot of work with outsourced teams or teams in different countries, I think it's a really great investment to have an expert come alongside you and just give you some guidance, and a framework to help understand what's going on.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for questions today. However, if you have more, we would be happy to talk with you further. We should have our contact information up on the screen shortly as well, so you will be able to see that. We will also be sending out a copy of today's webinar recording and slide deck in the next few days. Also, keep an eye out for our future webinars. This is the first one of our new series on how to eradicate outsourcing frustration. This series will focus on addressing common challenges so that you can maximize your outsourcing ROI and focus more on innovation and growth. Additionally, in an effort to continue bringing you valuable content, we would love your feedback on this webinar. We have put a link to a short feedback survey in the chat below, and we'd appreciate any feedback you can provide. And lastly, we would like to give a big thank you to Dave Peace for sharing his expertise and insightful presentation with us, as well as to thank Greg Salzman and Kevin Sandall for their time and willingness to share practical strategies to improve communication. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next time.